So, here's what we have been turning a corner to discuss on Sunday mornings. We started last week with this portion of biblical basics, talking about the celestial realm, which is my chosen word for the heavenly realm, the realm of God and His angelic servants up there, His divine family. I'm using the term celestial. And what we're going to do this morning is I'm going to introduce to you three branches of the celestial family and how they're hierarchically constructed so that we see a vision of how exactly the celestial realm is actually meant to function. And then the next 3 weeks, we'll cover each of these subsections in great detail. This is not everything that we could say about the celestial realm, but this will be enough to get us started. This will be the basics for how things go. But first, pop quiz. You are a sucker. I call you a sucker. So you a sucker, Logan. All right, you guys thought you were going to get off easy. Well, school's out for y'all, but school's in right here. So we're going to do a 10-question pop quiz from last week's lesson and review. Don't worry, some of these are multiple choice. Plenty of these are true or false. If you were here last week, you should be, I think that was most everybody, you should be able to remember what these questions are. So, question number 1. What is a god according to the thinking of the ancient world? A, precious metal shaped into a statue. B, anything that inhabits the celestial realm. C, an omniscient, omnipotent, omnipresent being. Or D, peanut butter. Talon, I saw your hands up first. C. Logan. Okay, so we got a C, we got a D, and we got a B. The correct answer is B. Any being that inhabits the celestial realm was called a god. We always think of, going back to this slide, we always define it as C. That's modern definitions. That's not how the ancients thought. So look at the questions. I mean, this is stuff that you just have to learn in school. Read the question in its entirety. According to the thinking of the ancient world, the correct answer is B. Any non-physical being that inhabits the celestial realm is considered a god. Question number 2. What Hebrew word is most commonly used for celestial beings in the Old Testament? A, Adamah. B, Eden. C, Elohim. Or D, Shema. Harley. The correct answer is C, Elohim. Yes, but I didn't see who raised their hands first, so I just went with the one hand over here. That's okay. I'm not necessarily going with who raises their hands first. I'm just trying to spread the wealth, but good job for knowing that. Right. Any being that inhabits the celestial realm in Hebrew could be referred to as an Elohim. Any of them. It's a category title. Remember, like mom or pastor. It's an all-encompassing word. It is not a very specific word in and of itself. True or false? In the Hebrew language, Elohim is always spelled in the plural. I hear a false. I hear another false. Okay. Anybody else want to speak with more assuredly? Assurity? Sorry. What? True. The answer is that is true. Elohim is always spelled in the plural. In Hebrew, I am means it's very, very likely a plural word. So if it was just El, it would be singular, but Elohim is plural. True or false? Despite the plural spelling of Elohim, it can be used for Israel's single God in the Old Testament. True? True? That is true. And for questions 3 and question 4, if you actually read Psalm 82:1 that we looked at last week, in the Hebrew, you would realize in the very first sentence, Elohim is used twice for 2 different groups. God, a group in and of himself, and the rest of the Elohim, or the rest of the celestial beings that he is holding court to judge. So yes, Elohim is always spelled in the plural, but it can sometimes refer to a singular person or a singular being of the celestial realm. Question number 5, what determines if Elohim is singular in its meaning? A, the grammatical context. B, the verb the noun is attached to. C, the adjective attached to the noun is singular. Or D, all of the above. Grant. Anybody else? The correct answer is D, all of the above. I thought I might trick some people up with this one, as B and C are basically the same thing, just with different parts of a sentence, verb or adjective. Yeah, essentially, yes. Okay, the correct answer is D, all of the above. So there are ways, if you pay attention, to figure out, well, do I translate Elohim as a singular being like God? Or is it multiple beings like God's, even though the spelling hasn't changed? So you have to pay attention to the details sometimes. Get used to it. 6, true or false? Yahweh is an Elohim. Logan. That is true. If an Elohim is any being that inhabits the celestial realm, then Yahweh is an Elohim. He is a non-physical being, a spirit being, a celestial being, a heavenly being. Pick a term. He is a God, but he is more, right? Which of these is not referred to as an Elohim in the Bible? A, God. B, living humans. C, dead humans. D, demons. E, angels. F, cherubim. Or G, the gods and goddesses of other nations. Talon. E, okay. Grant? The correct answer is B. This I thought was a tricky one, especially because I used a little bit of tricky stuff here, or at least I tried to. Yes. Well, very good. Remember that Samuel in 1 Samuel is referred to as an Elohim after he's dead. The witch at Endor calls up his spirit, and she calls him an Elohim, a spirit, because, well, he's dead. He's not a living person anymore, and living people can be called Elohim because they passed on to reside in the non-physical world. Even angels are Elohim because they're also spirits. Exactly. Very good. So, Elohim is an all-encompassing word in Hebrew. It is what I am calling a celestial being. It is a broad category, and it can sometimes be a specific category. 8, true or false? There is no difference between Yahweh and all other celestial beings. Logan. False. Yahweh is a celestial being, or he is an Elohim, but other celestial beings or Elohim are not Yahweh. He alone is holy, 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 and the whole earth is filled with his glory. He is holy and completely other in his character, his identity, his being, or his ontology. I've used that word with y'all before. He is completely and utterly different than all the other beings in the celestial world. He created them. All of that good stuff. So this language is a child could read and understand this in the ancient world. They knew, reading their Hebrew text, what they were saying about Yahweh. It was obvious to them. Yes, he is an Elohim, but he is not like all the other Elohim. Yes, he is a celestial being, but no, he is not like the other celestial beings for lots of different reasons. True or false? Celestial beings are image bearers of God. I hear a false. Logan? Okay. Ali, Talon, I couldn't tell if you had your hands up. True or false? 50-50 chance. False? Okay. That is true. And you didn't even have to beat the crowd yet, except maybe Zane, because he was the only one who had answered yet. But we're not used to thinking this way. This is part of what I want to correct in your thinking now. Because likely, if most of the adults in the church were asked, they would just refer to them as angels because they don't know these different categories in all likelihood. If it are angels image bearers of God, they would probably say no, because that's what denominations have taught for hundreds of years. That's just the tradition that gets passed down. In the Bible, they are image bearers. They bear God's status. They bear his power. They bear his name in a lot of ways. You know, they bear responsibility. They are allowed to rule. All of the same, not all of the same, because you're a physical being. They're not a physical being. But a lot of the same qualities that you possess as an image bearer of God, they already had when God created the physical universe. When God is talking in Genesis 1 and he says, "Let us make man," he's talking to his heavenly family. And he says, "Let us make them in our image." Meaning they are image bearers. They rule the heavenly realms under God's authority, just as we are allowed to rule the physical realm under God's authority. Yes, they are image bearers. We need to rethink our concept of what an image bearer is to include the celestial being. Final question. Got a little bit cut off here. Number 10. Does the Bible teach monotheism? Logan?
I'm going to say yeah.
You're going to say yes. Okay. This is not necessarily a yes or no question, though. I'm not asking a true or false. I'm not asking a multiple choice. I'm asking you to think. Does the Bible teach monotheism? What did I say last week? Sometimes. You're getting close. You're getting close.
You said it teaches a bunch of different, the way you think it's called, you said it teaches you a bunch of different. Yeah.
A bunch of different words. Good. Well, we'll review 3 of those words in just a moment. So, does the Bible teach monotheism? Depends on what you refer to as a God. This is the thing. Monotheism itself is a modern term. It has not been around but a few hundred years. How do you read modern terms back into ancient language? They didn't call themselves monotheist. We wouldn't go to Israel and they say, "Well, what is the Jews' religion?" "Oh, well, we're monotheists." That wouldn't mean anything to them. And quite frankly, depending on how you think of it, you're as much of a polytheist as the ancient Israelites were, if you understand how they define a God. If a God is any being that inhabits the celestial realm, then there's lots of gods, but there's only one Yahweh. This is what we're getting at here. A popular definition of monotheism, the belief that only one God exists, and a popular definition of polytheism is the belief that multiple gods exist. But the ancient world defined these beings all as gods by their nature of non-physical beings. Beings that live and reside in the non-physical universe, the celestial realm. So by that definition, even we are polytheist because we believe in angels and demons. Does that mean the Bible doesn't teach monotheism? It depends on how you define what a God is. The problem with using such overly simplistic and modern terms is that the ancients had no problem believing in multiple gods. Even the ancient Israelites believed in lots of gods because there are an unknown number of beings inhabiting the celestial realm. You don't know how many angels God created. He doesn't tell us. You don't know how many celestial beings He birthed in the beginning. It is unknown to us. Look up at the sky and count the stars if you can. Remember, looking up at the sky is exactly how they start categorizing the heavenly world. They look up and they see something different than the land on which they live. And if you can count all those stars up there, maybe you could number the gods. Maybe you could number the celestial beings that are up there living. Yes, this is phenomenological language. What is phenomenological language? That you can see. Did you say can't? I couldn't tell. Anything that you can see with your naked eye, and you start thinking based on what you can see and describing based on what you can see, that is phenomenological language, which is why I like, let me just go back to, just a picture like this. Back before cities and electricity lit things up, this is kind of how you would look up and see the night sky out in the wilderness. A ton more stars and a ton more celestial, heavenly, nighttime glow You look up there and you just see it, and it's so different from the world in which you inhabit. And that becomes your categories for thinking about the divine realm, the heavenly realm, the gods, the celestial realm that are up there. You can't get there, and it doesn't belong to you because you are created out of the land, the Adamah, and you are made for the land. And so you start thinking differently about that world. And you don't think in terms of what modern people use to think in a post-scientific worldview. What I am trying to teach you the basics of is to get you to think, to distinguish between scientific worldview and ancient thinking. Ancient thinking is phenomenologically based. Even Israel thought in terms of lots of gods. However, they made the claim that their God, their Elohim, Yahweh, was unlike the other Elohim, the other gods. He created the other beings and he ruled over them as their king. He gives them purpose and power as his image bearers. And he calls them to account and he judges them if and when they rebel. And we've already looked at that in Psalm 82, and we'll look again at Psalm 82. So, does the Bible teach monotheism? Well, it depends on how you define it, but a biblical definition of monotheism might be the belief that Yahweh is the one and only being in existence of his kind, of his class, of his being, of his ontology, his nature. That word ontology that we've used many, many times, and I will use it again and again. There is only one Yahweh. And if that is what you define as a God, then yes, there is only one God. But that's not the ancient definition of God. Yahweh alone possesses certain qualities that set him apart from all the other beings in the celestial and the terrestrial realm. Any guess as to what the terrestrial realm is? Good. Terrestrial, earth. That's it. If the celestial realm is above, the terrestrial realm is where you and I live and reside. God is omnipotent, omnipresent, omniscient, uncreated, infallible, incorruptible, and many, many more. There's only one being, one person in the entire Bible that the celestial beings themselves bow down to and call holy, holy, holy. And that is Yahweh and Yahweh alone. He is in a class by himself. So recognizing such distinctions in language have led some to label the ancient Israelites as henotheists. One of the words I introduced you to last week, though I got the definition slightly backwards with monolatry, so ignore that. Henotheists are people who believe in multiple gods, but they worship only a single God as supremely worthy. And quite frankly, you and I, who believe in angels and demons, are closer to the ancient definition of this modern term henotheist, because you believe in a lot of different celestial beings. You just don't worship any but one. At least you should not. Any questions on that? That's all the review. Okay? And I've called this celestial assumptions in this portion of Biblical Basics because, again, this is something a child would know and understand in the ancient world. They get it. This is not confusing for them, but they think in these categories that the text is written in. They don't have words like monotheist, polytheist, and henotheist. They just tell stories. So, today, and for the next 3 weeks, here's what we're going to cover and unpack. Today, we're just going to introduce this. God ordered the celestial realm hierarchically. There is order, and some beings are higher up in that order than the others. We will look at 3 major categories of celestial beings. 1, the sons of God or the divine council. Did you know that God uses a council? We're going to look at those scriptures next week. Number 2, the guardians of God's sacred space, called the Cherubim or the Seraphim in Isaiah 6. These are not 2 different classes. These are the same class. Seraphim and Cherubim are the same thing. They're just using different words, and I'll explain the reasons why in 2 weeks. And then finally, we get to the terms that we already know, angels. We will talk about angels proper, the lowest ranking beings of the celestial realm. They send messages for all the rest. So, the hierarchy of heaven can be illustrated to look like this. Yahweh is on the top, and as you can see, he is, of course, in a class of his own. The divine council, or the sons of God, are immediately underneath him. The guardians of sacred space are underneath him, and then the angels are underneath that. Now, sometimes it appears that angels and the cherubim should be switched, and that would be fine. But at the very least, the cherubim are right outside God's inner circle. And this is God's inner circle, making sure that nothing unclean like you or me comes any closer to God than is absolutely necessary, lest you be burned to cinders. It is for your protection as much as for God's honor. So we're going to unpack this heavenly hierarchy in the next 3 weeks and look at each of these categories by themselves. Now, let's watch this video from the Bible Project. I have edited a few different videos down into about 6 minutes worth of video here as a single video. So we'll watch this, then we'll summarize it and be done.
For most of human history, people have believed in some kind of spiritual realm that exists alongside the world as we know it.
Right, and the biblical authors are no exception.
Yeah, for them, the spiritual realm is a different kind of realm than ours. And to highlight that difference, the Bible refers to God's space as the sky, or the heavens.
Because the sky is really different from the land. It's above and beyond. And up there are shiny bodies that move around. I think of these as flaming gas balls.
But when the biblical authors looked up, the stars gave them a way to talk and think about spiritual beings. In the Bible, they're called the sons of God, or the rulers and authorities, or even sometimes the divine council.
So that sounds really important. What does the divine council do?
Well, they're introduced in Genesis chapter 1, where they're called the host of heaven, that is, the sun, moon, and stars. And there, they're also called signs, meaning that their power and status symbolizes and points to God's power and status.
Yeah, so in Genesis 1, God appoints them to rule over the day and night.
Exactly. And then later in the Bible, we're told that they were celebrating God's power and creativity when he created the world.
Like the cheering section of a game.
Yeah, right. There are also stories in the Bible where God invites the divine council to participate in making a decision. Like when they help decide how to bring down the corrupt Israelite King Ahab. Or in the book of Job, where they debate God's policy of rewarding people who do good.
So they're like God's staff team. But why does God need a team? If he's powerful enough to create the whole universe, he could surely rule it without any help.
Well, he doesn't need them. But apparently, the God of the Bible wants to share authority with others.
Oh, right. God shares his rule with human partners on Earth. And so, in the same way, there's a parallel story of God sharing his authority to rule with spiritual partners. We've been talking about spiritual beings in the Bible, and we've looked at how God is in the heavenly realms, but not by himself. There's a whole staff team that the Bible calls the divine council.
But in the Bible, there are still more beings in the spiritual realm, like the cherubim and also the angels.
So let's talk about them. Okay, first, the cherubim. These are chubby little babies with wings, right?
No, you gotta get that image out of your head. Cherubim, or in Hebrew, cherubim, they're way more fascinating. They're described as hybrid creatures, a collage of different animals, and every time they do appear, they look a little bit different.
That's intense.
Yeah, they're supposed to be intimidating. They stand guard at the boundary between heaven and earth. If you see them, you know you're entering the presence of the one who is above all and truly other.
The first time cherubim show up in the story of the Bible, they're standing outside of the Garden of Eden.
Right, the garden is God's temple residence, and so he places these spiritual bodyguards at the entrance so that the rebel humans can't get back in and ruin everything.
But the biblical story is about how God wants us back in his presence.
Yes, exactly. So this is why he chose the people of Israel and gave them the gift of a symbolic miniature Eden called the tabernacle, and then later the Jerusalem temple. In both of these spaces, cherubim were painted and engraved all over, reminding the priests that they are working in God's presence.
Now, if a priest went into the Holy of Holies, he would see there a golden box called the Ark of the Covenant, and on it were 2 cherubim. What's going on here?
Well, the biblical authors describe the ark as the footstool of God's throne, which the cherubim are carrying. Like we read in Psalm 99, God sits enthroned above the cherubim.
But there was no actual throne above the box.
Right, the Israelites weren't supposed to represent God with any physical image. But when the prophets had visions about this space, they saw Yahweh sitting on his throne.
Okay, so cherubim guard the sacred space, carry God's throne, but why do they look like animal mashups?
Well, they're symbolic representations of all the creatures of the earth, because they all belong to God. This is why in Isaiah's vision, all of the creatures are singing. Everything that fills the earth is God's glory.
Like a choir.
Yeah, through the cherubim, all creation offers praise to its maker.
Great. That's the cherubim. Now let's talk about angels. I'm way more familiar with them, human-like figures with feathery wings.
No, wait, stop. Angels in the Bible don't have wings.
What? No wings?
No angel wings. In fact, angels are often mistaken for people because they look like us, just a bit more impressive.
But the cherubim have wings.
Yeah, and the angels are different because they have a different purpose.
Okay, which is?
Well, humans can't just march into God's realm, so God will reach out to us, and he often does so through these spiritual ambassadors.
So angels are like spiritual messengers.
Yeah, in fact, that's what the word angel means, a messenger.
Right, this happens a lot in the Bible, like the angel who tells Mary she's pregnant with Jesus.
Yeah, and then the other main role of angels is to perform missions on God's behalf.
Sometimes they rescue people from danger, like when Peter is released from prison. And there's some really cool angels, like Michael and Gabriel.
Yeah, the name Gabriel means God is my power, and Michael means who is like God. But also notice, these names point to God, not to the angels. Like humans, the angels are images of God's presence and power.
But still, how cool would it be to meet an angel?
Yeah, and maybe you will, and maybe you already have. But no one in the Bible is ever encouraged to go looking for angels, and when angels do show up, people are usually puzzled or freaked out.
So, angels are really awesome, but they play a supporting role in the Bible.
Yes, because God's ultimate purpose is to bring humans back into his presence in a reunited heaven and earth. And in the meantime, he uses angels to guide and to serve his people.
Okay, so a lot of that is going to be repeated in the next 3 weeks on the video. We'll cover cherubim and angels 2-3 weeks from today, and those clips will be played again along with some other clips to help actually define what these creatures are, at least with the cherubim. The sons of God next week will be the same way. So one last thing that I want to add to this is that there is a possibility that there is more to the heavenly hierarchy than what we're going to cover. I'm just throwing this out there so that you're aware that I'm not trying to be exhaustive. I don't even think the Bible is trying to be exhaustive and give us a full picture, because if we knew the full picture, would we ever care about our own responsibility? Probably not. We'd get distracted and we'd run off and we'd pay attention to all these other things that don't actually concern us. And a couple of things that might need to go on here are the military powers of heaven. A military in the ancient world could be called a host. And a lot of the times in the Bible, and depending on what English translation you use, they will talk about heavenly hosts, the armies of heaven. Whether or not that they mean a literal army is up for question, which is why I put question marks here. They could just be any of these other 3 categories, and they could just be gathered together, ready to do God's will, and there's such a large number that the biblical writer is referring to them as an army, a host. But they could also literally be a military power of heaven ready to go out and wage war against the evil celestial beings that will crop up. So I'm throwing it out there that they could be a part of the heavenly hierarchy, and they could go here or they could go somewhere else. If they belong on the heavenly hierarchy, I think that this is probably my best guess as to where they would go. Outside of God's inner circle, but above the angels. I'm not really going to cover that in great detail because I don't know if that's accurate or not. The second thing is, you will see up here that alongside Yahweh in the Old Testament, there is a character called the angel of the Lord in English, the angel of Yahweh. He will speak and he will act as if he were God. He starts showing up, depending on maybe in the book of Genesis, but he starts showing up by the title, the angel of Yahweh, in the book of Exodus. So I'm going to save a discussion for him when we get to the book of Exodus. After we get done talking about the celestial realm, we're going to hit Scripture a lot faster and move through the story in bigger chunks. So we'll get to Exodus not too far in the distant future. When we do, we will come back to the angel of Yahweh, and I want you to remember that I have at least mentioned his presence and existence. Why is he up here with Yahweh if Yahweh is a category of his own? It would appear, depending on how you read the Old Testament, but I think this is accurate, that another way that the angel of Yahweh gets described as the commander of Yahweh's armies, the captain of his hosts, which would lend credence to the idea that heaven has a military. This angel appears to be second in command over the heavenly realm, but he also appears to be God. This angel, I would argue, is the second person of the Trinity. That Yahweh exists as three persons. And the second person of the Trinity is the person who was born of a virgin in Bethlehem and became man and died for our sins on the cross. The angel of Yahweh in the Old Testament is the one of the Godhead who became Jesus of Nazareth. But he is also God in a category all his own. But I'm not going to include him in the celestial assumptions. We will save him for another day.